Today we are discussing the French New Wave films. French New Wave films or the New Wave films which happened in France in the late 1950s. French New Wave, or in French language it is called La Nouvelle Wave. Nouvelle Wave. La Nouvelle Wave. What is it? It is a French art film movement which emerged in the late 1950s. It is a French art film movement which came out in the late 1950s. The movement was characterized by its rejection of traditional filmmaking. This Nouvelle Vague or French New Wave films, this movement was characterized by its rejection of traditional filmmaking in favor of experimentation. The filmmakers made or tried experimentation and a spirit of iconoclasm. Iconoclasm means it is the social belief in the importance of the destruction of icons and other image or cherished beliefs. വിഗ്രഹഭഞ്ജനം. അപ്പോൾ എന്താണ് ഈ ന്യൂവൽ വേഗ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ? അതായത് 1950കളിൽ ഫ്രാൻസിലുണ്ടായ ഒരു നവതരംഗ സിനിമയിലെ ഒരു നവതരംഗം, ന്യൂവൽ വേഗ് ഓർ ന്യൂ വേവ്, നവതരംഗം. അപ്പോൾ ഈ നവതരംഗ സിനിമകളുടെ പ്രത്യേകത എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാലുണ്ടല്ലേ, പരമ്പരാഗതമായ സിനിമാ നിർമ്മാണം അത് റിജക്റ്റ് ചെയ്തു. പുതിയ പുതിയ പരീക്ഷണങ്ങൾ അവർ കൊണ്ടുവന്നു. അത് മാത്രമല്ല, പഴഞ്ചൻ വിശ്വാസ പ്രമാണങ്ങളെ തകർക്കുന്ന ഐക്കണോക്ലാസം, പഴഞ്ചൻ വിശ്വാസ പ്രമാണങ്ങളെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സമൂഹത്തിൽ നിലനിൽക്കുന്ന അനാചാരങ്ങളെയൊക്കെ തകർക്കുന്ന രീതിയിലായിരുന്നു ആ സിനിമകൾ, ആ നവതരംഗ ആർട്ട് ഫിലിംസ്. The New Wave films explored a new approach to editing. They had a new approach to editing, visual style and narrative. They had a new visual style, editing technique and narrative technique. They also engaged with the social and political upheavals of the era. And also the filmmakers of the New Wave era in the late 1950s, they also engaged themselves in the social and political upheavals, struggles of the era of the late 1950s. They engaged, the New Wave filmmakers engaged in the political and social upheavals of the era. See, the New Wave is often considered one of the most influential movements in the history of cinema. Anyhow, the French New Wave, French Nouvelle Vague is often considered, it is regarded as one of the most influential movements in the history of cinema. അപ്പോൾ എല്ലാ ലാംഗ്വേജിലും ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള നവതരംഗ സിനിമകൾ ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുണ്ട്. മലയാള സിനിമയിൽ നവതരംഗ സിനിമകൾ എന്ന് പറയുന്നതിൽ നല്ല ന്യൂ ജനറേഷൻ ഫിലിംസ് എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നതാണ്. ഓരോരോ കാലഘട്ടത്തിലും പീരിയോഡിക്കലി സച്ച് ന്യൂ ജനറേഷൻ ഫിലിംസ് ഹാപ്പൻഡ് ഇൻ മലയാളം ഇൻഡസ്ട്രി. നീലക്കുയിൽ 1954 നീലക്കുയിലായാലും ന്യൂസ് പേപ്പർ ബോയ്, 1955 ഇറങ്ങിയ ന്യൂസ് പേപ്പർ ബോയ് ഒരു പരീക്ഷണ ചിത്രമായിരുന്നു. റിയലിസ്റ്റിക് ഫിലിം, ആദ്യത്തെ റിയലിസ്റ്റിക് ഫിലിം എന്നാണ് അറിയപ്പെടുന്നത്. ഭാർഗവി നിലയം 1969 ഇറങ്ങിയ ഭാർഗവി നിലയം. ഭാർഗവി നിലയം 1964, ചെമ്മീൻ 1965, കണ്ടം വെച്ച കോട്ട്. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ മലയാളത്തിലെ ഔട്ട്ഡോർ ലൊക്കേഷന് പ്രാധാന്യം കൊടുത്ത ആദ്യത്തെ സിനിമ ഓളവും തീരവും, പി എൻ മേനോൻ്റെ ഓളവും തീരവും. പിന്നീട് വന്ന പി എൻ മേനോൻ്റെ ചെമ്പരത്തി, അടൂർ ഗോപാലകൃഷ്ണൻ്റെ സ്വയംവരം, നിർമ്മാല്യം 73 MT സംവിധാനം ചെയ്ത ദേശീയ അവാർഡ് കരസ്ഥമാക്കിയ നിർമ്മാല്യം, ഏറ്റവും നല്ല നടനുള്ള ഭരത് അവാർഡ് നേടിക്കൊടുത്ത നിർമ്മാല്യം. പിന്നെ അരവിന്ദൻ്റെ ഉത്തരായണമായാലും, അതുപോലെ അതിഥി എന്ന് പറയുന്നൊരു സിനിമയുണ്ട്. പിന്നെ എലിപ്പത്തായം, അടൂർ ഗോപാലകൃഷ്ണൻ്റെ എലിപ്പത്തായം. അങ്ങനെയുള്ള അമ്മയെ അറിയാൻ, അരപ്പെട്ട ഭരതരാജൻ്റെ 80കളിലെ സിനിമ അരപ്പെട്ട ഗ്രാമത്തിൽ, യവനിക, അതുപോലെ ഷാജിയൻ ഖാരൻ്റെ പിറവി, അടൂർ ഗോപാലകൃഷ്ണൻ്റെ മതിലുകൾ, മരണസിംഹാസനം എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സിനിമ. അപ്പോൾ ഇവയെല്ലാം ഇങ്ങനെ ഇങ്ങോട്ട് വന്നു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ന്യൂ ജനറേഷൻ സിനിമകളുടെ ഒരു ഘോഷയാത്രയായിരുന്നു. പിന്നെ യഥാർത്ഥ ന്യൂ ജനറേഷൻ സിനിമ പത്തുകൾക്ക് ശേഷം പ്രേമം പോലെയുള്ള, ചാപ്പ കുരിശ്, മയാളും ഞാനും തമ്മിൽ, നേരം, ജല്ലിക്കെട്ട്. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെ മലയാള സിനിമയിലും ധാരാളം ഈ കാലഘട്ടത്തിലെ ന്യൂ ജനറേഷൻ സിനിമകൾ. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു തരത്തിൽ വി ക്യാൻ കോൾ ദം ന്യൂ വേവ് ഫിലിംസ്. അതിപ്പോൾ കൂടുതലായിട്ടുണ്ടാകുന്നത് ഈ 2010 ശേഷമാണ് ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത് മലയാളത്തിലെ സിനിമകൾ. അതിൽ അൽഫോൺസ് പുത്രനായാലും അമ്പൽ നീരദായാലും. അപ്പോൾ ഇവരെല്ലാവരും കൊണ്ടുവന്ന ഈ പരീക്ഷണ ചിത്രങ്ങൾ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു തരത്തിൽ ന്യൂ ജനറേഷൻ സിനിമകളാണ്. They can be called new generation films. The French New Wave or Nouvelle Wave is the French critics and individuals had always initiated a serious study of cinema through film journals. You know, the film journals in France helped French critics as well as the interested individuals to have a serious study of cinema. The French critics and individuals had always started a serious study of cinema through film journals. Journals means magazines, film magazines. Journals, newspapers and magazines are called journals, film journals. The Caje-Dai group, the Caje, Casshiers, DUGROUP. Caje-Dai group labeled the existing cinema, the contemporary cinema, the film before 1950s. The Caje-Dai group labeled the existing cinema of the 1950s in France as Daddy's cinema. They called the existing films as Daddy's cinema. Daddy's cinema means the stereotype films, the stereotype cinemas, pointing out that such films lacked social realism. They pointed out that such films, the existing films, lacked social realism. So they labeled the films as Daddy cinema, pointing out the lack of social realism in these films. You know, Caje-Dai cinema is a French film magazine co-founded in 1951. It was founded by a group of people in 1951. What is Caje-Dai cinema? Caje-Dai cinema group. Caje-Dai cinema is a French film. It is the name of a French film magazine like our Nana Velli Nashatram, etc. The French film magazine co-founded in 1951. See, the founders of this film magazine are Andre Bazin, film critic and theorist. He is a French film critic and theorist. Jacques Denot-Valcroze and Joseph Marie Leduc. They were the three persons founded the magazine called Caje-Dai cinema. Caje-Dai cinema is the film magazine co-founded by Andre Bazin, Jacques Denot-Valcroze and Joseph Marie Leduc. Jacques Denot-Valcroze was a French writer, critic, screenwriter and director. He was all these things: a French writer, critic, screenwriter and director. Joseph Marie Leduc was an Italian-born journalist. He was an Italian-born journalist who was later settled in France. Joseph Marie Leduc was an Italian-born journalist, novelist, art critic and film historian. Then what is Daddy's cinema labeled by them? Daddy's cinema meant the cinema of quality. Cinema of quality, studio film, made in indoors, lavish decorations, lavish decorating style, lavish, excessive decorations, literary adaptations. Those films were the literary adaptations. They were the adaptations of famous novels. That is cinema, literary adaptation. And a careful screenwriting. They also had, Daddy cinema also had a very careful screenwriting. So such techniques employed by the films came to be known as Daddy's film. Daddy's film. It was a name used in sarcasm by the French critics, French film critics. Daddy's cinema. Daddy's film. The tendency to remain script-led and excess of safe psychology were some of the allegations against this type of Daddy's cinema. Whatever the allegations leveled against the Daddy's cinema by the French film theorists and critics, the tendency to remain script-led means films are based on well-knit, well-written scripts, film scripts, and the excess of safe psychology were some of the allegations against this type of cinema. A group of filmmakers belonging to the new generation deliberately turned away from the contemporary cinema trend of the late 1950s. A group of filmmakers belonging to the new generation deliberately turned away from the contemporary cinema trends of the 1950s. The contemporary cinema technique, cinema trend of the 1950s were characterized by, I told you earlier, were characterized by literary adaptations from famous literary works, costume dramas. They had lavish ornamentations, lavish settings. They were called costume dramas, and massive co-production. They were highly expensive films with a massive co-production. Means production was taken by so many famous companies together. That is massive co-production. So the contemporary cinema trend was characterized by literary adaptations. So they had literary adaptations for the script of the films, costume dramas, lavish ornamentations, and massive co-production, expensive production. The term Nouvelle Vague was originally coined in 1950s. The term Nouvelle Vague, Nouvelle Vague was originally coined in 1950s by Franco Giro, the editor of the then center-left weekly. He was the editor of a center-left weekly. Franco Giro, he was a French journalist and also screenwriter and politician. He was a left politician. Center-left politics referred to a moderate left politics. It referred to a moderate left politics, and also the political views were leaned to the left wing. The political views of the center left politics were leaned to. They had a leaning towards the left wing. That was center left politics. How is it known? Center left politics. So, who coined the term Nouvelle Vague? The term Nouvelle Vague was originally coined in the 1950s by Franco Giro. He was a left politician, writer, screenwriter, French journalist, etc. He was thus many things. Then L'Express. There was a term L'Express referred to the new socially active youth class. L'Express it referred to the new socially active youth class. The youthful actor, at that time in the 1950s, there was a youthful actor, around 30, youthful actor, Gerard Philippe. What is the name of the youthful actor? Gerard Philippe. His appeal on the audience, he had a great attraction. He had a massive attraction on the audience. His appeal on the audience, his great attraction towards the audience of the times, and the tremendous success of the 28-year-old Roger Vadim's Wave-B.A. Wave-B.A. It is French title. It is the film And God Created Women. And God Created Women, which was out in the year 1956. So two things happened in 1950s regarding youthful activities. That is, the youthful actor Gerard Philippe had a great appeal to the massive audience of the times. Youthful actor Gerard Philippe's appeal on the audience of the times and the tremendous success, tremendous box office success of the 28-year-old Roger Vadim's Wave-B.A. Which was released in 1956. The English title is And God Created Women. Were the two main reasons for the term being linked with the current trends of the cinema. That was how the term Nouvelle Vague linked, connected with the current trends of the cinema. So the dimension of the cinema changed with the appeal of the youthful actor Gerard Philippe, and also the youthful director of the film, 28-year-old youthful director Roger Vadim. They brought about a new dimension to the film world, French film world. They initiated a new kind of experimentation towards the French films or in French films. You know, Gerard Philippe, the youthful actor, Gerard Philippe was a French actor who appeared in 34 films. He actually acted in 34 films between 1944 and 1959. Within the short period, he acted between 1944 and 1959. He acted about 34 films. He was, until his untimely death, one of the main stars of the post-war period. He died at the age of 37. He was very much like our hero Jain. നമ്മുടെ ജയനെ പോലെയുള്ളൊരു കഥ. 41-ാമത്തെ വയസ്സിൽ ജയൻ മരണപ്പെട്ടു. ഒരു ചുരുങ്ങിയ കാലം കൊണ്ട്, കേവലം ഒരു 6 വർഷക്കാലം കൊണ്ട് ഒരു സൂപ്പർ സ്റ്റാറായി വളർന്ന ആളാണ് ജയൻ. അതുപോലായിരുന്നു ജെറാർഡ് ഫിലിപ്പ് ഫ്രാൻസിൽ. 1944 മുതൽ 1950 വരെയുള്ള ചുരുങ്ങിയ കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ he acted in 34 films. It was a history, you know, and he had an untimely death when he was just 37. And Roger Vadim was a French screenwriter, film director and producer. He was also a producer of films. Eng.Litt.Sem, that means English title is And God Created Women, a 1956 film, is a French romantic drama directed by Roger Vadim, starring Brigitte Bardot. Brigitte Bardot is an actress who starred the film. She was cast as the main character of the film. Juliet is an 80-year-old orphan. She is an 18-year-old orphan. That's her name, Juliet. Juliet is an 18-year-old orphan with a high level of, she had a high level of sexual energy. She is such a mental pervert. She had a high level of sexual energy. And she makes no effort to remain or restrain. Actually, she makes no effort to restrain her natural sensibility and sensualities. She makes no effort on her part to restrain or control her natural sensuality. She lay nude in her yard. Often she is such a mental pervert that she would lie nude in her yard, disregarding many social restraints. She disregards many social and societal restraints, controls, societal taboos, and the opinion of others. She also disregards. She also neglects the opinion of others living around her. These factors cause and attract the attentions of the most of the people around her. These factors cause and often attract the attentions of most of the people living around her. The film production of the time preferred young hands. During the late 1950s, the film production preferred young hands both in the screen and behind the camera. They preferred young hands, young people, youthful actors on the screen and behind the camera. In the production work also, in the camera work and other things also they preferred. The producers preferred young hands. And the gap that existed between the older and the younger generations of filmmakers. And there was a gap between the old generation of filmmakers and the younger generation of filmmakers. And the gap, the people between the older generations and the younger generations, they also boosted the emergence of a new kind of cinema. അപ്പോൾ ഈ പുതിയ തലമുറയ്ക്കും പഴയ തലമുറയ്ക്കും ഇടയിലുള്ള ആ ഫിലിം ഡയറക്ടേഴ്സും ഫിലിം മേക്കേഴ്സും ഈ ഒരു പുതിയ തരം സിനിമ, ഈ നവതരംഗ സിനിമയുടെ വരവിനെ അവരും ഹാർദവമായി സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്തു. They also boosted the emergence or coming out of the new wave films. That was the flourishing of the new wave films in French soil during the 1950s. The new wave emerged in the late 1950s, as I told you earlier. The new wave emerged in the late 1950s with Franco Truffaut's. The film which created or caused the new wave to come out was Franco Truffaut's, the filmmaker Franco Truffaut's, The 400 Blows. 400 Blows, which was released in the year 1959. And Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless. Jean-Luc Godard's film Breathless, which came out in the year 1960. So these two films actually inaugurated the new films, the coming of new wave films, Nouvelle Vague in France, which were the two films that inaugurated the coming of the new wave films in French soil. That is Franco Truffaut's The 400 Blows, which came out in the year 1959, and Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, which came out in the year 1960. Franco Roland Truffaut, his full name is Franco Roland Truffaut, was a French film director, screenwriter, producer, actor, and a film critic. He was all these things. Franco Roland Truffaut was a French film director, screenwriter, producer, actor. He was also an actor and a film critic. Franco Truffaut is widely regarded as one of the founders of the new French wave. He is considered as one of the founders of the new French wave movement. The 400 Blows came out in the year 1959. Yule and Jim. Yule and Jim came out in the year 1962. Day for Night, 1973. Stolen Kisses, 1968. Shoot the Piano Player, 1960. It came out in the year 1960. The Last Metro. It came out in the year 1980. 1980. The Last Metro came out in the year 1980. You know, the 400 Blows depicts, the film deals with the story of a 13-year-old boy whose adventures were based on the director Franco Truffaut's own adolescence. You know, actually it is autobiographical. The film has a lot of autobiographical elements because it deals with the 400 Blows. The 400 Blows deals with the story of a boy of 13 years of age whose adventures were based on the director Franco Truffaut's own adolescence.
Si tu me demandes 1000 francs, c'est que t'en espères 500, donc t'as besoin de 300. Tiens, voilà 100 balles. Tiens, voilà 500, va. Mais en principe, c'est ta mère qui fait ça.
Puis je me suis aperçu que ma mère, elle m'aimait pas tellement. Elle me disputait toujours. Et puis pour rien, des petites affaires insignifiantes. Et puis avec ma grand-mère aussi. Elle s'est disputée une fois. Et là, j'ai su qu'elle avait voulu me faire avorter. Et puis si je suis née, c'était grâce à ma grand-mère.
Ta mère, qu'est-ce qu'elle a encore?
Elle est morte.
Ah. Enfin, dans la mesure où on travaille tous les deux, vous savez ce que c'est.
Oui, je suis père de famille, moi aussi. Faut reconnaître que parfois, on ne s'y retrouve pas très bien.
Mais si seulement il avait voulu se confier à nous.
Jean-Luc Godard. Jean-Luc Godard is a French-Swiss film director. French-Swiss film director, screenwriter and critic. He rose to prominence, he rose to importance, he became a prominent film director. As a pioneer, he was a forerunner of the 1960s French New Wave film movement. He was a forerunner or pioneer of the 1960s French New Wave film movement and was the most influential filmmaker of the post-war period. He was also the most influential filmmaker of the post-war era.
Connaissez-vous ce garçon?
Tu es fou.
Most of the first films of the school, which school? The New Wave French film or Nouvelle Wave. Most of the first films of the school were created by critics. The filmmakers of the New Wave films, the initial New Wave films were critics who belonged to the Kaje group. They belonged to the Kaje magazine group. Kaje Film Journal Group. Most of the first films of the school were created by critics who belonged to the Kaje group. ഈ ആദ്യകാല നവതരംഗ ഫ്രഞ്ച് സിനിമകളുടെ നിർമ്മാണത്തിൽ പങ്കാളികളായത് കജേ ഫിലിം മാഗസിൻ ഗ്രൂപ്പിൽപ്പെട്ട സിനിമാ നിരൂപകരായിരുന്നു. They were Claude Chabrol, Jean-Luc Godard, Jack Rivette, Eric Romer, Franco Truffaut, etc. So they were the critics associated with the Kaje Film Magazine Group. Kaje cinema, that means notebooks on cinema. Kajeda Cinema means notebooks on cinema. It's a French film magazine, as I told you earlier. It is a French film magazine co-founded in 1951 by André Bazin, Jack Donald Valcross, and Joseph Marie Loduca. Then a film, a new wave French film, Les Beaux-Serge. It was directed by Chabrol in the year 1958. Chabrol, director is Chabrol in the year 1958. And Les 400 Coups, that is the 400 blows. The 400 blows, director is Truffet. The film was released in the year, the new wave film, Les 400 Coups or the 400 blows came out in the year 1959. These two films, Les Beaux-Serge by Chabrol and Les 400 Coups directed by Truffet, were considered as the trailblazers. Trailblazers means makers of new tracks. Trailblazers, makers of new tracks of this new wave film movement, of the new wave or the new wave French film movement. Les Beaux-Serge, film which came out in the year 1958. Les Beaux-Serge. The story is, the central character is Franco. Franco returns to his hometown Sardina. The protagonist, the central character Franco, returns to his hometown Sardina to find that the town Sardina has radically changed, fundamentally changed. The town had sea changes, it had undergone inexplicable, unbelievable changes. Moreover, he finds that an old friend, Serge, his old boyhood friend Serge, is an alcoholic, Madhyabaniya, and he decides to help him overcome his sadness. He is suffering from depression, so Franco decides, he takes a determination to help his friend to come out of his state of depression. He decides to help him overcome his sadness. That is the plot of the film Les Beaux-Serge, which came out in the year 1958.
Qu'est-ce qui se passe?
Bonsoir. Il est entré comme un serpent.
Voici quelques extraits de ce qu'écrit la presse à propos du beau Serge. Un thème pathétique. Depuis longtemps, on n'avait rien vu de plus bouleversant et de plus noble sur le grand mystère de l'amitié. Les admirables scènes finales atteignent dans leur dureté à une beauté rare. Le beau Serge obtient la consécration au festival de Locarno. Il s'agit d'un des films français les plus importants de l'année.
Je crois qu'il faudrait que tu la quittes.
Oh, est-ce que je sais ce qu'il fait? Il rentre même plus. Ça a été juste une fois.
Tina, il faudrait t'emmener chez nous.
Le beau Serge est un film exceptionnel. Nous sommes heureux de pouvoir vous le présenter prochainement sur cet écran.
Then Godard's Breathless and Rosener's, another filmmaker, Rosener's Hiroshima, My Love. Hiroshima, My Love. Hiroshima is a Japanese town which was bombed by the Americans. So Hiroshima, My Love also fitted in this pattern, the pattern of new wave French films. Other two new wave films, one is Breathless that we found earlier, and Rosener's the filmmaker Rosner's Hiroshima, My Love. They also fitted into the pattern of new French new wave film. The French new wave film or nouvelle films. Then Hiroshima, My Love. What is the story Hiroshima, My Love? Hiroshima, My Love tells the story of a French actress.
Hiroshima.
An actress from France, French actress, talks to her lover, a Japanese architect. Her lover is a Japanese architect. About her past. The actor, the French actor, talks about her past and shares her perspectives. She also the theoretical writings of Kaje's journals. The theoretical writings of the Kaje journals, which advocate the primacy of an auteur, A-U-T-E-U-R, auteur, auteur theory. What is auteur theory? You can see that. So the theoretical writings of the Kaje journals or the film critics advocated the primacy or the importance, the prime importance of an auteur and mise-en-scène. They also advocated the primacy of mise-en-scène and auteur in filmmaking. Primacy of auteur and mise-en-scène had established a tremendous influence. These critics with their theories of auteur theory and mise-en-scène theory established a tremendous influence on the filmmakers of the new wave. The new wave filmmakers were greatly influenced by the auteur theory and also the mise-en-scène theory enunciated by the film critics of the Kaje group, Kaje journal. Kaje group എന്നറിയപ്പെടുന്ന സിനിമാ നിരൂപകരുടെ സംഘം അവർ കൊണ്ടുവന്ന രണ്ട് തിയറി, ഒന്ന് പ്രധാനമായിട്ട് ഓറ്റർ തിയറി, mise-en-scène തിയറി. mise-en-scène തിയറി, mise-en-scène സെറ്റിങ്ങിൻ്റെ ഉപയോഗം, mise-en-scène നമ്മൾ പല പ്രാവശ്യം ചർച്ച ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്, അതിൻ്റെ ഉപയോഗം. അത് ഈ ന്യൂ വേവ് സിനിമകളെ വളരെ ഗണ്യമായി സ്വാധീനിച്ചു. But is auteur theory and auteur theory is this, an auteur usually a film director who applies highly centralized and subjective control to many aspects of a collaborative creative work. You know, in a filmmaking, film director is everything. He has a key point in filmmaking. Usually the film director who uses highly centralized, he has a centralized control. That means he controls everything. He controls one and all. And subjective control. Subjective control means personal control. He has subjective as well as centralized control to many aspects of a collaborative creative work. Filmmaking is a collaborative creative work. It is undoubted fact. So filmmaking is a collaborative creative work, and in the collaborative creative work of filmmaking, the director has centralized and subjective control of many aspects. For cinema നിർമ്മാണം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഫിലിം മേക്കിംഗ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് വെള്ളം മുതൽ വെളിച്ചം വരെ പല ഘടകങ്ങളുടെ സമഞ്ജസമായ സമ്മേളനമാണ്. അതിൽ വ്യക്തിപരവും കേന്ദ്രീകൃതവുമായ നിയന്ത്രണം ഏർപ്പെടുത്തുന്നത് സിനിമ സംവിധായകനാണല്ലോ, സിനിമയുടെ ഡയറക്ടറാണല്ലോ. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒന്നുകൂടി മനസ്സിലാകുന്ന രീതിയിൽ പറഞ്ഞാൽ, ഇൻ അതർ വേർഡ്സ്, ദി ഫിലിം ഡയറക്ടർ ഈസ് ഈക്വലന്റ് ടു ആൻ ഓതർ ഓഫ് എ നോവൽ ഓർ എ പ്ലേ. The film director of a film is equivalent to an author or the writer of a novel or a play. That is auteur theory. Auteur theory എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് എന്താണ്? സിനിമ ഡയറക്ടർ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ആരെ പോലെ? He is equivalent to the author of a novel or a play. Apart from this, several independent filmmakers who were not associated with any groups were following certain practices which were counter to the dominant trends, and also away from this new trend, there were so many filmmakers who were not associated or connected with the Kaje group, the film critic group. They were also following certain practices or customs which were counter, which were opposite to the dominant trends, existing trends. അപ്പോൾ ഇവരെ കൂടാതെ കജേ ഗ്രൂപ്പിലെ ഈ ആളുകളെ കൂടാതെ തന്നെ മറ്റ് ഫിലിം മേക്കേഴ്സും അതുവരെ നിലവിലുണ്ടായിരുന്ന സമ്പ്രദായങ്ങൾക്കെതിരെ പ്രവർത്തിച്ച് ആ സമ്പ്രദായങ്ങളെ തിരസ്കരിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് സിനിമാ നിർമ്മാണത്തിൽ ഏർപ്പെട്ട ഫിലിം മേക്കേഴ്സ് ഉണ്ട്. അതിൽ ഏറ്റവും പ്രധാനിയായിരുന്നു ദി മോസ്റ്റ് ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ് ഫിലിം മേക്കർ ഹൂ സ്റ്റുഡ് അവേ ഫ്രം any of the groups prevalent in the French New Wave movement was Eng.Litt.Sem. A lady director. Eng.Litt.Sem in her celebrated work, her most Anjali Menon എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുന്നത് പോലെ Eng.Litt.Semയുടെ ഏറ്റവും സെലിബ്രേറ്റഡ് ആയ മോസ്റ്റ് ഫേമസ് വർക്ക്, മോസ്റ്റ് ഫേമസ് ഫിലിം ഈസ് ലാ പോയിന്റ് കോട്ട്. ലാ പോയിന്റ് കോട്ട്, which came out in the year 1954. La Pointe Court had incorporated, she had included certain practices like location shooting. She shifted the production from the indoors of the studio to the outdoors of a location. It was she first made a location shooting for films. മലയാള സിനിമയിലെ ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ ലൊക്കേഷൻ ഷൂട്ടിങ്ങിന് പ്രാധാന്യം കൊടുത്തുകൊണ്ട് ആദ്യമായിട്ട് ഇറങ്ങിയ സിനിമയായിരുന്നു ഓളവും P.N. മേനോൻ്റെ ഓളവും തീരവും. അപ്പം അതേപോലെ Eng.Litt.Sem ഈ സ്റ്റുഡിയോയുടെ ഇൻഡോർ ഷൂട്ടിങ്ങിൽ നിന്നും പുറത്തേക്ക് സിനിമയെ കൊണ്ടുവന്ന സംവിധായകയായിരുന്നു. ആൻഡ് her most important film is La Pointe Court, which came out in the year 1954. She had included certain practices like location shooting. She had practiced the location shooting. Use of non-professional actors. She also made use of non-professional actors. നമ്മുടെ സിനിമാ സംവിധായകരായ G. അരവിന്ദൻ, അടൂർ ഗോപാലകൃഷ്ണൻ മിക്ക സിനിമകളിലും എന്നതുപോലെ നോൺ പ്രൊഫഷണലായ ആക്ടേഴ്സിനെ, താരങ്ങളല്ലാത്ത നാടക രീതിയിലൊക്കെയുള്ള നോൺ പ്രൊഫഷണലായ ആക്ടേഴ്സിനെ, ജയരാജും അതുപോലെ പല ആളുകളെ, സിനിമയുമായിട്ട് യാതൊരു ബന്ധവുമില്ലാത്ത ആളുകൾ, സിനിമ കണ്ടിട്ട് പോലും ഇല്ലാത്ത ആളുകളെ പ്രധാന കഥാപാത്രങ്ങളാക്കി കൊണ്ടുവന്ന ആളാണ് ജയരാജൻ. ജയരാജൻ്റെ കരുണവും ഒക്കെ അതിന് ഏറ്റവും നല്ല എക്സാമ്പിൾസാണ്. അപ്പം അതേപോലെ ദിസ് ഡയറക്ടർ Eng.Litt.Sem, what did she do? She followed certain practices like location shooting, use of non-professional actors, amateur actors, non-professional actors, a deliberate distanciation to evade spectator identification. She never wanted spectator identification. സിനിമയിലെ കഥാപാത്രങ്ങളുമായി കാണികൾ താതാത്മ്യം പ്രാപിക്കുന്ന രീതി അത് ഇവേഡ് ചെയ്ത് അത് ഒഴിവാക്കിയ ഒരു സംവിധായകയായിരുന്നു. She also made a deliberate distanciation to evade spectator identification and ignoring the chronological sense. She also ignored the chronological sense of the films. അപ്പോൾ ഈ സമയത്തിൻ്റെതായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു റിയലിസ്റ്റിക്കായ ഒരു സംവിധാനം, കാലഘട്ടത്തിൻ്റെ റിയലിസ്റ്റിക്കായ സംവിധാനം, അതിൽ നിന്ന് പോലും വിട്ടുമാറി നിന്ന ഒരു ഡയറക്ടറായിരുന്നു, വുമൺ ഡയറക്ടറായിരുന്നു Eng.Litt.Sem. She ignored the chronological sense in the classical narrative. In the classical narrative, we found classical narrative films observed chronological order, chronological sense. She deviated from the chronological order. Then Eng.Litt.Sem, the director, woman director, she was a Belgian-born film director, screenwriter, photographer. She was also an excellent photographer and artist. She was a Belgian-born film director, screenwriter, photographer and artist. Even though she was born in Germany, she settled in France, and her film La Pointe Court, it was a French New Wave film, and she did not belong to the group of Kajé Cinema. She never associated with Kajé Cinema. She was an independent film director, and her film proved to be one of the most influential films of the French New Wave cinemas. Her work, her influential film La Pointe Court was pioneering for, it was a forerunner for the development of the widely influential French New Wave film movement. Her work, important work, the famous film La Pointe Court was pioneering, it was a forerunner for the development of the widely influential French New Wave film movement of the 1950s and 1960s, which is a film which made a radical change in the filmmaking. Her work La Pointe Court was pioneering for the development. It was a forerunner for the development of the widely influential French New Wave film movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Her most important films are La Pointe Court, 1955, Cleo from 5 to 7, Cleo from 5 to 7, 1961, Vagabond, 1984, it came out in the year 1984, The Gleaners and I, The Gleaners and I, 2000, Faces Places, a recent film, 2017. Faces Places, 2017. Once again, to sum up, Vada's films employed location shooting. She shifted from the studios to the location. She took the film production from the inside of the studios to the outside locations. She employed location shooting in an era when sound technology made it easier and more common to film indoors. It was a time when the sound technology facilitated the film shooting indoors, inside the studios, with the constructed sets. It was a practice of the classical narrative to use constructed sets and painted backdrop of landscapes rather than outdoors as location. 1950-കളിൽ ആദ്യം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന സിനിമകൾ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ക്ലാസിക്കൽ നാരേറ്റീവ് സിനിമകളിൽ സ്റ്റുഡിയോയ്ക്കകത്ത് തന്നെ ഹാർഡ് ബോർഡിലും മറ്റും ചിത്രങ്ങൾ വരച്ചു വെച്ച് വലിയ മണിമാളികകളുടെ ചിത്രങ്ങൾ, തെരുവിൻ്റെ ചിത്രങ്ങളൊക്കെ വരച്ചു വയ്ക്കുന്നു, പൂന്തോട്ടത്തിൻ്റെ ചിത്രം വരച്ചു വയ്ക്കുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെ മനോഹരമായ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നദിയുടെ ചിത്രം, വെള്ളച്ചാട്ടത്തിൻ്റെ ദൃശ്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ വരച്ചുണ്ടാക്കുകയാണ് ചെയ്തത്. അപ്പോൾ അതിന് പകരം അങ്ങനെയുള്ള കൃത്രിമമായ പിക്ചേഴ്സ്, പെയിൻറ്റഡ് ബാക്ക്ഡ്രോപ്സ് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നതിന് പകരം it was Vada who took the film from the inside of the studios to the outside of locations. Then at that time it was easier and more common to film indoors with the constructed sets and painted backdrops of landscapes rather than outdoors of location. But she took film to the outdoor locations. Her use of non-professional actors was also unconventional for the 1950s French cinema. And also during the 1950s it was a practice of casting stars in the films. But Vada used non-professional actors actually who did not know acting. She employed in her films, she cast in her films. And this was a new novel practice. It was also a novel experience. To use French novel means new experience. And her use of non-professional actors was also unconventional for the 1950s French cinema. Some filmmakers of the school, which school? French New Wave film movement. See, some filmmakers of the school followed the practice of criticizing the bourgeoisie, criticizing the rich people, rich businessmen. There was a practice of some filmmakers criticizing bourgeoisie through the films, which created an illusion. This practice created a false belief in the minds of the audience that French New Wave was radical, it was leftist and political cinema. So actually there was no connection with the politics. But some of the films, it is true that they criticized the rich people. They exhibited the dark side of the bourgeoisie. And this led to the spectators or the audience believe that the French New Wave films were leftist films and political films. But actually it was a mistaken impression. It was an illusion, it was a false belief. Some filmmakers of the school followed the practice of criticizing the bourgeoisie, which created an illusion that French New Wave was radical films, leftist films and political cinema. The two factions of the French New Wave, there were two factions or two divisions, two factions of French New Wave existed in two periods. There were two factions of the French New Wave which appeared during 1958 to 1962. One faction existed during the period between 1958 and 1962. And another faction of French New Wave, another division of French New Wave films existed between 1966 and 1968, only 2 years. Anyhow, to sum up, we can say that the French New Wave cinemas had a deeper impact. They had a tremendous impact on the future cinemas, future world cinemas, we can say. So the two factions of the French New Wave, which appeared during the period between 1958 and 1962 and 1966 and 1968, had a clear and deep influence or impact in future cinemas, in future global cinemas. So this is about French New Wave. This may do as a discussion on French New Wave films.